President Barack Obama has accused the pro-Israeli lobby of spending millions of dollars to spread false claims about the historic nuclear agreement with Iran, and he has vowed to push back. The American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC for short, is the leading pro-Israeli voice in the United States, and he has told them he will resist their efforts to sink this deal, accusing them of being lobbyists. Although Obama never mentioned AIPAC by name, his remarks reflected a new low in relations between the most potent pro-Israel lobbying group in Washington and an American president in office. Indeed, Obama is actively rallying Democratic support to preserve the nuclear agreement ahead of a September vote on it in the Republican-led Congress. At the very same time, AIPAC is spending $40 million on television adverts in 35 states, urging legislators, including Democrats, to reject the accord. Why does Israel spend millions of dollars on propaganda regarding this Iranian nuclear deal? Are there similarities between those who promoted the war in Iraq in 2003 and the Israeli lobby of today? And are these pro-Israeli lobby groups helpful or harmful to the United States? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. Now, critics of the deal between Iran and the P5+1 countries include Saudi Arabia, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, and of course Israel. Are there similarities between these critics? That's the question we put to the American public.
Oh, everyone at some point's gotten money from America.
Yeah?
No, I mean, they have. Like, we gave Osama bin Laden money back in the day to fight the Russians, and so they did that. And then all these like little factions broke off, and you know, the weapons were taken from Iraq after Saddam went down, which went to ISIL. ISIL, am I saying it correctly? Yeah. So they got it because everything fell apart. So we've given everybody in that group money and weapons. Okay. Yeah, interesting. I never thought about that until this moment.
I would suppose that they all sort of, in certain ways, benefit from American tensions in the Middle East, especially from poorer countries.
Honestly, I'm not really up to date to comment, so I'll skip that question.
Oh, they all have their own interests. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what those are. I mean, you know, it's one thing in Israel, might be another in Saudi Arabia, but everyone's trying to protect their own. So,
I guess all of those probably stand to benefit somewhat from the status quo, detente or pressure on Iran.
Oh my goodness, those are tough questions.
They're all supporting Western hegemony and its goals. They're all tools for Western hegemony. They're also fulcrums for it.
Those are the views of the American public. What parallels do our experts see amongst the critics of the proposed nuclear agreement?
Each one of the mentioned countries and organizations maybe has its own reasons and differences with Iran. But mainly if we mention Saudi Arabia and ISIS, we can see that the differences is based mainly on sectarian reasons, while Israel is seen in Iran a threat to its existence.
First of all, one has to know that the interests of all these nations that you mentioned, or the so-called Daesh or the Islamic, the ISIL, what they have in common is their extremist views in different views. And when it comes to the Iran nuclear deal, it's mostly about what serves best their interests in the region. And obviously Iran's increasing influence in the region does not help at all. And one of the things that they all have in common is that they all sort of fuel division between, if you like, Islamic countries or between the Muslim communities around the world. And obviously Al-Qaeda is funded by the Saudis, or if you like, even the Israelis, and they all come back from the same, so they have sort of aligned within the same policy which they follow. And At the same time, they would like to use this alignment, which they have in common, to weaken Iran's influence in the region.
US President Obama has accused Israel of spending millions of dollars to spread false claims about the Iran nuclear agreement. But why is Israel doing this? Here's what the American public thought.
Self-preservation, they're freaking out, and there's that enormous lobby in this country, the Israeli-American lobby, and I haven't heard any Israelite complaining about the about Pollard, you know, this guy who was trading secrets to Israel. I don't hear any outrage there.
Because they can. You know, again, they're afraid. They see this as a threat. So, you know, they're going to use the influence that they have.
If they are doing it, which I'm not sure really that they are doing it, they're probably doing it because they want us to take more action against those bad people.
I don't know. I really don't know that.
Well, I don't run Israel, but I always find that often the government and the people aren't always in alignment. Not that I've hung out in Israel recently that I can vouch on it, but I think ultimately when a neighbor is nearby someone and there's some sort of tension or threat, they're gonna want a much more heavily deal that they feel 100% safe about, as opposed to just it's a pretty good deal or a decent deal.
I have no idea. It would seem it would seem that they would benefit more than others from this, but obviously political or public opinion there has been persuaded that that's not the case. So.
It's par for the course for the Israel lobby and their goals that they're based on disinformation. If Americans and Westerners in general knew the truth about Palestine, the Israel lobby would have no leverage, so to speak. This is nothing new. I mean, if Obama's complaining about that, it's nonsensical. I mean, when he was first campaigning prior to the first term, he pledged his fealty to the AIPAC lobby.
Our experts shared their perspective on the reasons behind Israel's massive investment to spread negative claims about the nuclear deal with Iran.
Let's agree first that Israel is based its existence on false claims and propaganda. They always trying to or like to be seen as victims, as a small country threatened by a heavy armed neighbors. So always they are trying to blackmail the US and other Western countries, maybe, as I said, to get more financial and military aids. I think Israel will never welcome any powerful country in the region, as it's always want to be the most powerful country there.
I think it's clear. I think firstly, it would be naive to think that the Americans and the Israelis are in actual disagreement over this. I think there's a very constructed and organized policy which both countries are following and implementing. This is not to say that I'm a conspiracy theorist, but you can tell, one can tell the Israeli opposition actually does serve the US foreign policy in regards to the Iran nuclear program on a long-term basis, whereby, I mean, obviously one of the more aspects of Iran being a nuclear weapon is sort of one of the things that is more fueled is it will make sense to the US population that we prevented Iran with the false claim of preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, which was a false claim in the beginning. So the Israeli feeling of this actually helps justify the Obama administration's policy towards surrendering to Iran's wills, if you like.
Obama has compared the Israeli lobbyists with those who fueled the flames for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. What parallels do the public see? We found out.
None. I don't see any parallels.
I forgot who was president at the time, but it was a hoax, you know, about weapons of mass destruction, and it was BS. And God knows how many lives were lost as a consequence of these blunders. And they've done it with impunity, which is sad, you know.
Well, I do know that the leader of Israel, before we invaded Iraq, promised the world would be safer if Saddam Hussein was not in control. And he was clearly wrong, because Iraq is more of a dangerous, volatile situation than it ever was prior to that.
Lies cultivated and promoted for the sake of cynical control of geopolitics, of the hydrocarbons of the region as a strategic chokehold for the rest of the planet.
People who are not afraid of war, people whose kids aren't the ones who are going to be dying. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an attitude, a certain amount of cockiness and arrogance and sort of lack of appreciation for the how incredibly difficult war is for the people who have to fight it and live under it.
To be honest, just with my knowledge of the history of the region, I do see a little bit of an anti-Muslim sentiment, and so that's one comparison. But not you know, that might not necessarily be the source, but a tool.
Parallels between those throwing flames. I mean, I see the paranoia. You know, the kind of control is slipping, so you want to do something to get it back, and you know, make America great again, whatever that means. Yeah.
We put the same question to our experts, who said this about the similarities between Israeli lobbyists now and those who supported the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Regardless of nationality, ideology, identity, Israel always looking for an enemy. In the past was Jamal Abdel Nasser, then Saddam Hussein, then Hafez al-Assad of Syria, then Yasser Arafat, and now Iran. As I said, and I think that Israel doesn't like any peace deal or any peaceful environment. In my belief, the main contradiction to Israel's existence is peace existence.
I think this is a little bit of a misconception. I think there's no parallels. I think it's merely a political stance by Obama, whereby he's trying to use the mistakes of the Iraq invasion to win support for the Iran deal. Although it shouldn't be mistaken with the fact that Iran has never been after any weapons, any sort of weapons, and it is a clever move by Obama to actually try to make such a comparison in the first place, raise this concern in the first place. He basically justifies why US was forced to surrender and to accept Iran's rights to nuclear energy and other undisputed rights of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Obama has admitted that the current situation in Iraq is the consequence of the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. But why has Obama not been more vocal about his own policy of training unknown militants in Iraq? We asked the public.
Well, a lot of the times, I mean, if you look at most unknown militants that are trained, Al-Qaeda is a great example, they eventually just turn against us or someone else who were supposedly, you know, so this idea of training people and then expecting them to do what you want to do doesn't necessarily work out. So it's a very dangerous strategy, and it's backfired many times before. Countless, really. And if you look at historically, both Syria and Iran at one point had democracies that were overthrown by the Brits and the US in cooperation with large oil companies. I believe BP Oil, which then was known as Standard Oil. And they, you know, they just said, oh, we can't let the government take back the oil reserves, so we have to overthrow the regime. And so we've destabilized different parts of the world for economic benefit on numerous occasions.
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know. Well, you know, he's a politician, you know, and yeah, that's all I can say. Yeah.
Because he has people that are telling him to shut up.
I think because people don't necessarily want to air their own dirty laundry, so it's easier to point fingers than to say, you know, what part you've actually taken, you know, in a certain situation. So I mean, it's obvious. Like, if you've done dirt, you're not going to say, well, this is what I've done. You're going to say, you know, look what these people have done. This is the mistakes of others, but you're not going to necessarily say what the mistakes that you've made.
I don't know. Is that? I mean, he probably wouldn't want to be outspoken about that because it kind of conflicts with ideas that people have about the presidency and about Obama and his policies.
It's difficult for him politically. There are strong opinions on the other side. I think, yeah. I mean, I don't think he's adequately. I think he could do better about explaining to American population as well as the world where he stands, what his policy, and what he's trying to achieve, and how he's going about it. I do think more transparency on the part of the Obama administration, and more reckoning, especially with the Republican candidates all making a campaign issue of it. I think you know, why he doesn't spend more time and energy on it, I'm not sure.
Well, I would say those two are completely different and have completely different outcomes. One could be, you know, militants and training and and military power doesn't necessarily equal tension, but acts of aggression and acts of cooperation and acts of intervention, all three of them are totally different things, and so I don't think Obama would find that particularly relevant as a comparison.
Now this is interesting. I mean, a lot of times I think that people in politics maybe do have something, not to hide, but maybe they don't confront an issue until they're held over the fire about it. Maybe it kind of just came to a head, and so now is the time that he absolutely has to deal with it, or else it's, you know, riot. It's like going to be a big deal if he doesn't try to smooth this over.
Our experts offered an insight into why Obama has not been more public about his own policy of training unknown militants in Iraq.
Of course, Obama now is leaving the White House, so he's not worried about anything, so he can speak freely. Maybe he can express his conscience even freely. And it's unfortunately, it's like any other U.S. president. They feel a kind of free to speak their minds when they are out of the office. Usually politicians finding easy to blame others instead of speaking frankly about their policies, and Obama is one of them.
The thing is, the history tells us throughout the history, I mean, America has been the country that has been in the most wars throughout history than any other nation. And they've only been existing for what, maybe 500 years or more. Where the interests of the US come into play, they will not restrain from committing any crime to strengthen their hegemony in the region. So Obama's caution is to ensure that he maintains the US balance of influence in the region, in my opinion.
Israeli lobby group AIPAC is spending around $40 million in 35 states to urge politicians to vote against the Iran nuclear deal. Are Israeli lobby groups healthy for the United States or dangerous? Here's what the public thought.
I think they're dangerous. And, you know, I would ask Pollard, I would ask Schumer, where does your allegiance lie? You know, is it to Israel or to the United States? You know, straight up.
They're healthy for the U.S.
Why?
Because they spark, they make people start getting involved. That's the best I could say, really.
Well, I think lobby groups in general should all be eliminated. But even the good lobby groups are there to basically take care as a response to the bad lobby groups. Lots of money being spent to influence politicians. I think ultimately it should be sort of referendums if people were more educated. But in America, our education system's pretty poor. You guys have a much better education system than we do, so our citizens tend not to be well informed, and they tend to manipulate citizens' emotions to lead to which way people vote. So I think ultimately lobbying in general across the board is a pretty dangerous thing.
They're dangerous. I mean, they're essentially a foreign you know, they're not. The AIPAC and the Israel lobby are probably the most pernicious influence in Washington in terms of lobbyists. I mean, they don't advocate for American policy for so-called American interest, whatever that means. It's all about Zionism and the Zionist project of a greater Israel and crushing of the Palestinians and any other regional powers that are able to resist that hegemony, or would-be hegemony.
I think it would be nice if voices from all over could come, and including from Israel, but I think the reality is that well-funded organizations tend to dominate the conversation with things like the political ads. And yeah, I mean, on the balance, I don't think it's healthy for the U.S.
I've seen this sort of stuff before, and I've never been too positive on it. You know, I'm very negative on the whole thing, to be honest.
On AIPAC?
Yeah.
How so?
Just painting false pictures of the situation and the people who live there and the history of any conflicts that might be there. And I think it's one of the most disingenuous things that is happening today.
I don't think really, I mean, are any lobby groups healthy for the U.S.? I mean, not just the Israeli lobby group, but and a lobbyist group spending that amount of money is just, there's something wrong with that, Israeli or not, yeah.
We invited our experts to consider whether these high-spending Israeli lobby groups are helpful or harmful for America.
AIPAC and other pro-Israeli groups are not good for the U.S. because they put Israel's interest before the American interests. I think all these groups are trying to blackmail again the public, the American public. They are trying to take more of the taxpayers' money and send it to Israel. But things, I think, changed. American people are fed up of this. Before, it was a kind of taboo to question the American support to Israel, but now we are hearing an increasing number of American people who questioning this relationship and asking for justification for all this money and aids provided by the U.S. to Israel.
Of course not. I mean, it's not healthy at all. Any foreign intervention in any kind, in any country, undermines the sovereignty of that nation or government. So the influence of the Israeli lobby on the U.S. government is a great concern, especially for the U.S., for the American population. And this puts into question the whole democratic system in America. And I think most of the U.S. population are already aware of these inadequacies within their government and within the U.S.
AIPAC is doing its best to write and direct U.S. foreign policy. Israel and pro-Israeli lobbyists in America are determined to try to convince Congress to reject this nuclear deal. That makes Israel and its supporters in America the primary impediment to global stability, as they spend a fortune trying to undermine these historic talks. And if they succeed, the cost to the world will be measured in far more than dollars alone.